Sometimes the most desperate choices lead us exactly where we're meant to be. Sarah Chen stood in the doorway of what the county clerk had generously called a cabin, watching her breath form small clouds in the October mountain air. The structure before her leaned like a drunk against the Washington pines, its roof patched with mismatched shingles and hope. Behind her, 8-year-old Emma slept in their packed Honda, trusting her mother's promise that this would be their fresh start. Sarah had been a respected geology professor once, before the university cuts, before the medical bills from Emma's pneumonia, before the foreclosure notice that arrived like a death sentence. Now she waitressed at truck stops and counted pennies, but she still knew rock formations, which made what she'd glimpsed in the old stone well behind the cabin absolutely impossible. When her flashlight had slipped from her trembling hands and tumbled down into the depths, she'd expected to see water. Instead, the beam had illuminated crystalline structures that seemed to breathe with an inner blue radiance, formations that defied every law of geology she'd ever learned. The light had pulsed, almost like a heartbeat, calling to something deep in her chest. What secrets lay buried beneath this forgotten piece of mountain wilderness, and why had the previous owner simply vanished without a trace? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The wind picked up, sending pine needles skittering across the warped porch boards as Sarah forced herself to look away from the well. Focus on the practical things first, she told herself. The same mantra that had gotten her through the last 18 months of watching her life crumble piece by piece. She pulled the crumpled paperwork from her jacket pocket, the deed that made her the official owner of this listing disaster for the princely sum of $1, plus fees that had eaten up most of her remaining savings. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd once lectured undergraduates about the geological formation of these very mountains, back when she had tenure and a pension plan and naive faith that hard work guaranteed security. The cabin's front door hung crooked on its hinges, the wood swollen with decades of mountain moisture. Sarah had to put her shoulder into it, the screech of protest loud enough to wake Emma. Through the Honda's rear window, she watched her daughter stir, dark hair falling across her face in the same stubborn cowlick Sarah had inherited from her own mother. Emma's jacket, too thin for mountain weather, was bunched up as a makeshift pillow against their suitcases and the 3 cardboard boxes that now contained their entire lives. Inside, the cabin was worse than the exterior had promised. Water stains mapped abstract continents across the ceiling. The kitchen consisted of a rust-stained sink, a propane camping stove the previous owner had left behind, and cabinets that hung open like gaping mouths. The living room held a stone fireplace that might provide heat if the chimney wasn't blocked by bird nests or worse. But it was theirs. After the foreclosure, after sleeping in the car for 2 weeks while Emma thought they were on an adventure, after the humiliation of asking her sister for money, only to be told that some people need to learn to live within their means, this broken-down cabin represented something Sarah had almost forgotten existed: hope. She tested the floorboards near the fireplace, relieved when they held her weight without the groan of rot. The previous owner, a man named Frank Cartwright according to the county records, had disappeared in 1962, simply walked away from his property taxes and vanished, leaving behind only whispered stories among the locals about strange lights in the forest and how the well water could make you see things that weren't there. Sarah had dismissed such talk as mountain folklore when the county clerk mentioned it. She was a scientist, after all, even if she currently wore a grease-stained apron instead of teaching geology. But now, remembering that impossible blue radiance from the well, she felt the first whisper of doubt in her rational worldview. A soft knock on the doorframe made her turn. Emma stood in the threshold, rubbing sleep from her eyes, her expression carefully neutral in the way that 8-year-olds master when they're trying to be brave for broken parents. "Is this really ours, Mom?" "Really ours," Sarah confirmed, crossing to wrap her arms around her daughter. Emma felt too thin beneath the worn fabric of her jacket. The doctor had warned that another bout of pneumonia could be serious, and winter was already painting frost warnings across the morning grass. "It's kind of spooky," Emma said, but not complainingly. She'd learned not to complain about much lately. It just needs some love, and maybe some new shingles, and possibly an entire new roof. Sarah forced lightness into her voice. What do you think? Ready for our mountain adventure? Emma nodded and wandered toward the fireplace, trailing her fingers along the stone mantel. There's something weird about this place, though. Can you feel it? Sarah's chest tightened. Weird how? I don't know. Like it's watching? But not in a scary way. More like when you're sad and someone wants to help but doesn't know how. The word sent an unexpected chill down Sarah's spine. She'd felt something similar standing at the edge of the well, staring down at those impossible crystal formations. A sense of presence, of ancient patience, of something waiting just beyond the edge of understanding. Let's focus on getting our stuff inside before it gets dark, she said instead. We can explore properly tomorrow. But even as they carried their meager possessions into the cabin, even as Emma chatted about which corner could be her bedroom and whether the fireplace actually worked, Sarah's thoughts kept drifting to the well, to the way those crystals had pulsed with inner light when her flashlight beam struck them, to the warmth she'd felt in her chest, like recognition. Tomorrow, she promised herself. Tomorrow she'd approach this like the scientist she used to be. She'd measure and analyze and find a rational explanation for what she'd seen. Tonight, she just needed to keep her daughter warm and fed and safe in their new home, impossible geology or not. The mountain wind whispered through the pines outside, carrying with it the faint scent of winter and the weight of ancient secrets. Sarah woke before dawn to Emma's cough echoing through the thin cabin walls. The sound cut through her dreams like a blade, jolting her upright on the makeshift bed they'd assembled from couch cushions and spare blankets. In the grey pre-dawn light filtering through cracked windows, she could see her breath misting in the cold air. She'd failed to get the fireplace working last night. The chimney was blocked, just as she'd feared, and the propane camping stove could only do so much against the mountain cold seeping through gaps in the cabin's weathered boards. Emma's cough had started as a tickle after dinner, canned soup heated over the single working burner, and had worsened through the night. Not again, Sarah thought, pressing her palm against Emma's forehead. No fever yet, but the wheeze in her daughter's breathing was unmistakable. Dr. Martinez had been clear. Emma's lungs were still recovering from her bout with pneumonia 6 months ago. Another infection could mean hospitalization, specialists, bills that would crush what little stability they'd managed to build. Morning, baby, Sarah whispered, smoothing Emma's hair. How are you feeling? Just cold, Emma said, but her voice carried the telltale rasp that made Sarah's stomach clench. Is there hot chocolate? Sarah's throat tightened. The last packet of cocoa mix had been Emma's treat 3 days ago, back when they were still living out of the Honda. Their food supplies consisted of canned goods from the discount grocery store, a loaf of bread going stale, and peanut butter that would have to stretch until her next paycheck from Mickey's diner, whenever that might come. I'll see what I can find, she said instead. Stay bundled up, okay? The kitchen in daylight looked even more desperate than it had the night before. Water dripped steadily from a stain near the window, and the single cabinet that closed properly held their meager supplies like a mouth with missing teeth. Sarah heated water in their one pot, and made weak tea with a bag she'd saved from yesterday's breakfast. While Emma sipped the tea, Sarah mentally catalogued their situation with the same methodical precision she'd once applied to rock formations. They had enough food for maybe 4 days if she was careful. The Honda needed gas and an oil change she couldn't afford. Her cell phone showed 1 bar of service on a good day, and the nearest neighbor was 3 miles down a dirt road that would become impassable once the real snow hit. The job at Mickey's diner was supposed to start Monday, 40 minutes down the mountain in a town that time forgot, slinging coffee and eggs for truckers and locals who tipped in quarters when they tipped at all. Nothing like the university salary that had once made her feel secure, back when she'd believed expertise and hard work guaranteed stability. Mom? Emma's voice was smaller now, uncertain. Are we going to be okay here? The question struck Sarah like a physical blow. Emma had asked variations of it for months. When the eviction notice came, when they'd loaded everything important into the car, when Sarah had sold her grandmother's ring for gas money. Each time Sarah had managed confident reassurance, but sitting in this broken cabin with winter closing in and her daughter's health hanging by a thread, the words felt impossibly heavy. "We're going to make it work," she said finally. "We always do, right?" Emma nodded, but Sarah caught the shadow that crossed her daughter's face. 8 years old, and already learning that adults' promises sometimes cracked under pressure. After breakfast, toast with the last of their jam, Sarah bundled Emma in every layer they could spare and set her up near the window with coloring books and puzzles. The morning light revealed just how much work the cabin needed: gaps between floorboards wide enough to lose coins, windows that rattled with each gust of wind, the persistent drip from the ceiling that would freeze solid once temperatures dropped below freezing. But outside, the property told a different story. 40 acres of towering pines stretched toward ridgelines, painted gold with autumn aspens. A creek Sarah hadn't noticed yesterday sparkled beyond the tree line. And everywhere, that strange sense of presence Emma had mentioned, like the forest itself was aware of their struggle and wished it could help. Sarah's gaze drifted inevitably toward the well. In daylight, it looked innocent enough, just fitted stones rising from the earth like a medieval fortress in miniature. But she couldn't forget the impossible blue radiance she'd glimpsed in its depths, or the warmth that had flooded through her chest when she'd stared into that otherworldly light. Her scientific training demanded investigation, document the phenomenon, gather data, find rational explanations. But another part of her, the desperate mother watching her daughter's health deteriorate in a cabin barely fit for summer camping, whispered more dangerous thoughts. What if Emma had been right about this place wanting to help? What if there were forces in the world that her geology textbooks had never catalogued? What if their impossible luck in finding this property for a single dollar hadn't been luck at all, but something reaching out to them in their darkest hour? Emma's cough echoed through the cabin again, and Sarah's hands clenched into fists. Tomorrow she'd investigate the well properly. Tonight, she just needed to keep her daughter warm and hope morning would bring answers. Morning arrived with the sound Sarah had been dreading. Emma's cough, deeper now, rattling in her chest like stones in a tin can. Sarah pressed her ear to the thin cabin wall separating their makeshift bedrooms and counted the seconds between each labored breath. 7 seconds, 6, 5. No, she thought, pulling on her jacket with shaking hands. Not here. Not when we're an hour from the nearest hospital on roads that turn to ice without warning. Emma was sitting up when Sarah entered, her small face pale against the pile of blankets they'd heaped around her like a fortress against the cold. The wheeze in her breathing was unmistakable now, the same sound that had preceded her hospitalization 6 months ago. "I'm okay, Mom," Emma whispered, but her voice was barely audible, just a little scratchy. Sarah knelt beside her daughter, fighting to keep her expression calm while her mind raced through calculations. The nearest urgent care clinic was in Millfield, 40 minutes down winding mountain roads. Her phone showed no bars. The Honda's gas tank hovered just above empty, and her bank account held $37 until the diner job started Monday. If they left now, drove to town, sat in an emergency room for hours, what then? Antibiotics they couldn't afford? Another prescription that would max out the credit card she'd sworn not to touch? And they'd have to come back to this freezing cabin afterward, to the same damp cold that had triggered Emma's relapse in the first place. "Let me get you some warm tea," Sarah said, her voice steadier than her hands. In the kitchen, she stared at their dwindling supplies while the water heated. 3 cans of soup, half a loaf of bread. Peanut butter scraped thin. She'd calculated enough food for 4 days, but that assumed Emma stayed healthy, assumed they could wait for Sarah's first paycheck, assumed winter would hold off just a little longer. The wind picked up outside, rattling the loose window panes and sending a fresh cascade of pine needles across the porch. Through the kitchen window she could see storm clouds gathering over the ridgeline, dark and heavy with the promise of snow. Emma's cough echoed through the cabin again, followed by a sound that made Sarah's blood freeze, the wet, congested breathing that meant fluid was already building in her daughter's lungs. She was reaching for her car keys when she heard it. The well. Not a sound exactly, but something deeper than sound. A resonance that seemed to rise from the earth itself, like a tuning fork struck deep underground. Sarah froze, her hand halfway to the key hook, as warmth spread through her chest, the same impossible warmth she'd felt last night when she'd stared down into those crystalline depths. This is insane, she told herself. Your daughter needs medical attention, not mountain folklore. But even as she thought it, her scientific mind couldn't ignore what she'd witnessed. Crystal formations that shouldn't exist in this geological region. Light that pulsed without any visible energy source. The way Frank Cartwright's disappearance in 1962 coincided with local stories about the well granting impossible wishes. Emma's breathing grew more labored, and Sarah felt something crack inside her chest. The rational choice was clear: drive to town, find help, deal with the consequences later. But what if there were no consequences to deal with? What if the answer to their impossible situation lay 30 feet down in the earth, waiting in chambers that geology textbooks couldn't explain? She found herself walking toward the well before she'd consciously decided to move. In the grey morning light, the fitted stones looked ancient beyond measure, weathered smooth by decades of mountain storms. The wooden cover Frank Cartwright had installed still lay where Sarah had moved it last night, and the opening yawned before her like a mouthful of secrets. The blue radiance was fainter in daylight, but still visible, a soft pulse emanating from the depths, like a heartbeat made of light. And as Sarah stared down into that impossible glow, she felt the presence Emma had described, something vast and patient and aware, something that had been waiting in the darkness for longer than human memory could measure. Help her, Sarah thought, the words forming without conscious intent. Please, whatever you are, whatever you want. She's just a child. She doesn't deserve this. The light pulsed brighter, and warmth flooded through Sarah's body like sunlight after months of winter. For a moment, she could swear she felt something reaching back to her across the impossible distance between human understanding and whatever forces moved in the deep places of the world. Emma's cough stopped. Sarah spun toward the cabin, her heart hammering against her ribs. Through the kitchen window, she could see her daughter sitting up straighter, color returning to her cheeks, breathing clear and easy for the first time in hours. The well pulsed once more behind her, and Sarah faced a choice that would change everything: accept this impossible gift and whatever price it demanded, or pretend she'd witnessed nothing more than coincidence and mountain air. Emma laughed, actually laughed, from inside the cabin, the sound bright and clear as mountain water. Sarah closed her eyes and stepped toward the well. Sarah's foot stopped inches from the well's edge. What am I doing? The question crashed through her mind like cold water, shattering the warm certainty that had drawn her forward. She stood frozen between the impossible blue glow beneath her feet and Emma's clear laughter drifting from the cabin, her heart hammering against her ribs as rational thought reasserted itself with brutal clarity. She was a scientist, a geology professor who understood crystal formations and underground water systems and the simple fact that wells didn't pulse with otherworldly light. Whatever she thought she was seeing, whatever warmth she imagined flowing through her chest, there had to be an explanation that didn't involve supernatural intervention. Coincidence, she told herself, backing away from the stone-rimmed mountain air. The change in altitude. Kids recover quickly from these things. But even as she formed the words, her scientific training betrayed her. She documented Emma's previous pneumonia episode with meticulous care, the progression from wheeze to congestion, the way antibiotics had taken days to show effect, the slow climb back to clear breathing. What she'd just witnessed wasn't normal recovery. It was instantaneous healing that violated everything she understood about respiratory illness. The well pulsed again, fainter now, as if whatever presence dwelled in those depths was retreating back into darkness. Sarah felt an almost physical tug toward the opening, a magnetic pull that made her fingers twitch toward the rope she'd left coiled beside the stones. No, she forced herself to take another step backward. I won't do this to her. Because that was what terrified her most. Not the impossibility of what she'd witnessed, but how desperately she wanted to believe in it. The relief flooding through her veins felt like the first hit of a drug she already knew could destroy them both. If she accepted this gift, if she allowed herself to believe that some benevolent force in the earth wanted to help them, what would stop her from coming back the next time Emma got sick, or when the heating bill came due, or when their food ran out? She thought of Frank Cartwright, who'd owned this property in 1962. The county clerk had mentioned his disappearance casually, as if men simply vanished from mountain properties every few decades. But what if he hadn't disappeared? What if he'd made the same choice Sarah was contemplating now, accepted the same impossible help, and gradually lost himself in the depths of a well that granted wishes? Mom? Emma's voice called from the cabin doorway, clear and strong. Sarah turned to see her daughter standing without the hunched posture of labored breathing, color bright in her cheeks, looking healthier than she had in weeks. Are you okay out there? You look scared. Scared. Such a simple word for the chaos tearing through Sarah's chest. She was terrified. Of the well, of whatever forces moved in chambers that shouldn't exist, of the crushing weight of their situation that made impossible solutions seem reasonable. But mostly she was afraid of the part of herself that wanted to kneel at the well's edge and beg for more. Food that never ran out. Money that appeared when they needed it. A life where Emma never had to see her mother cry over bills they couldn't pay. Just checking something, Sarah called back, her voice steadier than her hands. Go inside where it's warm. But Emma was 8 years old and far too perceptive for her own good. She padded across the yard in bare feet that should have been freezing, her recovered breathing creating small puffs of mist in the cold air. The well's doing it again, isn't it? Emma said quietly, stopping beside her mother. The glowy thing. Sarah's mouth went dry. You can see it? Uh-huh. It's like it's trying to talk, but doesn't know people's words. Emma peered down into the opening with the fearless curiosity that made Sarah's protective instincts scream. It helped me breathe better, didn't it? The casual acceptance in her daughter's voice sent ice through Sarah's veins. This was how it would begin. Emma growing up believing that impossible things were normal, that help always came from sources that defied explanation. What would that do to her understanding of the world? How could Sarah teach her about hard work and consequences, and the difference between reality and wishful thinking when they were living 30 feet above? Proof that reality had more facets than any textbook described. The well's glow intensified, responding to their proximity, and Sarah felt that magnetic pull again. Part of her, the desperate mother who'd been drowning in impossible choices for months, whispered that she was overthinking this. Emma was healthy. Their immediate crisis had passed. Maybe some gifts didn't come with prices attached. But the larger part of her, the scientist who'd spent years studying cause and effect, knew better. Everything in nature came with costs. Energy couldn't be created or destroyed, only transformed. If something in the well had healed Emma, that power had to come from somewhere. The question that made her hands shake was simple. What would it want in return? Sarah wrapped her arms around Emma's shoulders and guided her firmly back toward the cabin, leaving the well's patient glow behind them in the gathering shadows. Sarah managed to keep Emma inside for exactly 3 hours. They played card games with a deck missing the 7 of hearts. They read stories from Emma's tattered collection of library books. They even attempted a puzzle featuring kittens in a basket, though half the pieces seemed to have vanished during their multiple moves. But through it all, Sarah felt the well's presence like a second heartbeat, steady and patient, and utterly impossible to ignore. Emma felt it too. Sarah caught her daughter standing at the kitchen window, staring toward the stone rim with the kind of focused attention she usually reserved for her favorite cartoons. When Sarah asked what she was looking at, Emma just shrugged and said the light was getting brighter. By noon, Sarah couldn't pretend anymore that this was something they could walk away from. The rational part of her mind, the professor who'd spent years teaching students about observable phenomena and reproducible results, kept insisting they pack the car and drive to town. Find a motel room near the medical clinic. Return to the world of copays and prescription costs and problems that money could eventually solve, even if she didn't have any. But her bank account balance hadn't changed. The Honda still needed gas she couldn't afford. And Emma kept breathing with the easy rhythm of perfect health that had materialized the moment Sarah approached the well. "You're a scientist," she told herself while heating canned soup for lunch. "So be scientific about this. Gather data, form hypotheses, test them." The thought terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. After Emma finished eating, more appetite than she'd shown in days, Sarah made her decision. Not the desperate choice of this morning driven by panic and maternal instinct, but a calculated risk based on careful observation of an unprecedented phenomenon. "Emma, I need you to stay inside for a while. Can you do that for me?" Her daughter looked up from her coloring book, crayon poised over a half-finished rainbow. "You're going down there, aren't you? Into the well?" The matter-of-fact tone made Sarah's chest tighten. "I'm going to investigate. Like the scientists do in your books when they find something new. It won't hurt you," Emma said with the absolute certainty that only 8-year-olds possessed. "It likes us. I can feel it." "That's what scares me most," Sarah thought but didn't say. Instead, she gathered her supplies, the flashlight with fresh batteries, her phone to record video evidence, the rope Frank Cartwright had left coiled by the well, and her small geology hammer, though what good it would do against forces that defied natural law, she couldn't imagine. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the yard as Sarah approached the well. The blue radiance was unmistakable now, pulsing stronger with each step she took. Not just light, she realized, but something that bypassed her eyes entirely and spoke directly to whatever part of human consciousness recognized the numinous. She secured the rope to the iron ring Frank had bolted into the stones, testing it with her full weight. The man might have vanished, but his hardware was solid. The rope disappeared into the blue glow like a lifeline thrown into an alien sea. Standing at the edge, flashlight in hand, Sarah felt the last of her old life slip away. The professor who believed in measurable phenomena, the mother who solved problems through research and persistence and staying within the bounds of the possible, the woman who had spent 34 years assuming she understood the fundamental rules of reality. Below her, the light pulsed with what she could only describe as anticipation. Sarah clipped her phone to her jacket pocket, set it to record, and spoke into the mountain air. "This is Dr. Sarah Chen, October 15th, approximately 2 p.m. I'm investigating anomalous geological formations discovered in a hand-dug well on property recently acquired in Millfield County, Washington." Her voice sounded steadier than she felt, professional, as if this were just another field study and not the moment she stepped off the edge of everything she'd believed about the world. "Initial observations suggest crystalline structures emitting bioluminescent properties inconsistent with regional geology. Purpose of descent is to document and analyze these formations." She paused, then added quietly, "If something goes wrong, Emma, my daughter Emma, call 911. Tell them your mom went into the well." She gripped the rope, stepped over the stone rim, and began her descent into impossible blue radiance. The world above, cabin and trees and autumn sky, shrank to a circle of ordinary daylight 30 feet overhead, but below her, the light intensified with each foot she descended, until she was surrounded by a glow that seemed to emanate from the very walls of the shaft. Except they weren't walls anymore. Somewhere during her descent, the fitted stones had given way to smooth rock carved with symbols that hurt to look at directly, and the bottom, when her feet finally touched solid ground, opened into a cavern that couldn't possibly exist beneath a hand-dug well. Sarah stepped away from the rope and into a cathedral of living crystal, where blue light danced through formations that pulsed like captured starlight, where the air hummed with presence so vast and ancient that her scientific mind simply shut down, overwhelmed by wonder too profound for analysis. She had crossed the threshold. There was no going back. Sarah's breath misted in the cool air as she fumbled for her phone, muscle memory from years of field research taking over. when her conscious mind failed her completely. The device trembled in her hands as she raised it, the mundane glow of its screen looking pathetic against the cathedral of impossible light surrounding her. The well shaft has opened into a natural cavern, approximately. She turned in a slow circle, trying to estimate dimensions that seemed to shift when she wasn't looking directly at them. 50 feet in diameter, height indeterminate. The crystalline formations appear to be growing directly from the bedrock, which should be granite at this depth, but looks more like limestone or... A sound interrupted her. Not quite music, not quite wind, but something that resonated in her bones like a tuning fork struck against her sternum. The crystal formations pulsed brighter, and Sarah felt presence wash over her like warm water. Welcome. The word formed in her mind without passing through her ears. Sarah spun toward the source, her flashlight beam dancing wildly across walls covered in symbols that seemed to writhe in her peripheral vision. "Who's there?" Her voice echoed strangely, as if the cavern was much larger than her eyes suggested. "We are the keepers of the deep places. We are what remains of those who walked between worlds before your kind learned to name the stars." The presence pressed closer, not threatening but overwhelming in its vastness. Sarah felt like an ant trying to comprehend the ocean, her human consciousness straining against concepts too large to hold. "What do you want?" she whispered. Not want, need. The distinction carried weight that made her knees buckle. "Your world grows cold, the barriers thin. Soon the hollow ones will notice this place, and when they do, all warmth will drain from the mountain like blood from a wound." Images flooded Sarah's mind. Winter that lasted years, trees turning to crystal, Emma's breath freezing in her lungs. She saw the mountain wrapped in supernatural cold that had nothing to do with weather and everything to do with entities that fed on life itself. "I don't understand." But part of her did, the part that had always known there were more things in the world than geology textbooks described. "You are the first to descend in 60 years. The last one served us well, but his strength finally failed. Frank Cartwright held the barriers until his human frame could bear no more." Sarah's mouth went dry. "He didn't disappear. He died down here. He chose to stay, to become part of our defenses. His essence still flows through these crystals, still helps us hold back the cold. But we need a living guardian now, someone who can walk in both worlds." The blue light intensified around her, and Sarah felt something probing at the edges of her consciousness. Not invasive, but testing. Like a job interview conducted by beings that existed on a completely different plane of reality. "You have the knowledge. We sense the stone wisdom in your mind, the way you read the earth's secrets. And you have the need. A child who requires healing, a life that requires shelter. We can provide both. At what cost?" The professor in her demanded specifics, even as the desperate mother whispered that any price was worth paying. "Protection. When the hollow ones come, and they will come before the snow melts, you must stand with us. Your human will, combined with our ancient power, can maintain the barriers that keep this valley safe." Images flashed through her mind again. Herself standing in this crystal cavern, while shadows pressed against barriers of light, her consciousness stretched between human form and something far more vast. It looked terrifying and magnificent and utterly irreversible. Your daughter would be safe, fed, warm. The crystals would ensure she never suffers from the weakness in her lungs again. But you would belong to both worlds, human when you walk above, but part of us when duty calls. How long? Sarah's voice cracked. How long would I have to serve? Until another comes who can take your place, or until the barriers no longer need holding. Perhaps years, perhaps decades. Emma's face rose in her mind, bright, trusting, 8 years old and completely dependent on her mother's choices. How could she sentence her daughter to growing up with a mother who was only half human? But how could she condemn Emma to poverty and sickness and all the ways the world could break a child when protection was being offered? You need not decide now, the presence said, though Sarah sensed urgency beneath the patient words. Take what healing your daughter requires. Return when you are ready to hear our full offer. The crystals pulsed, and Sarah felt power flowing through her, not into her, but through her, like she was becoming a conduit for forces that predated human civilization. When it faded, she knew with absolute certainty that Emma would be completely healthy for weeks, maybe months. But know this, the hollow ones already stir. Winter brings them closer to our world. If you choose to refuse us, take your child far from this mountain before the first deep snow. The rope to the surface seemed impossibly far above, as Sarah grasped it with hands that still tingled with otherworldly power, carrying an offer that would save Emma's life and possibly cost Sarah her humanity. The climb back up felt like ascending from the depths of an ocean, each foot of rope burning in Sarah's hands as she hauled herself toward the circle of ordinary daylight above. Her muscles screamed, but that pain was nothing compared to the weight of the choice pressing down on her chest like a physical force. Years. Perhaps decades. The words echoed in her mind with each pull of the rope. She tried to picture Emma at 18, 20 to 5, 30, growing up with a mother who disappeared into crystal caverns whenever cosmic duties called. What kind of life was that for a child? What kind of childhood could Emma have when her mother existed half in this world and half in something that predated human language? Sarah's boots scraped against the stone rim as she pulled herself over the edge, collapsing onto solid ground beside the well. The autumn air felt thin and insufficient after breathing atmosphere charged with otherworldly presence. Above her, normal clouds drifted across a normal sky, but she could feel the weight of impossible depths beneath her back, could sense the patient attention of beings that measured time in geological epochs. "Mom." Emma's voice cut through her spiral of thoughts. Her daughter stood in the cabin doorway, no longer pale and wheezing, but radiating health that practically glowed in the afternoon light. "You were down there forever." I was getting worried. Forever. Sarah checked her phone. She'd been gone less than an hour, but it felt like she'd lived lifetimes in that crystal cathedral, aged years under the pressure of choices no human should have to make. "I'm okay, sweetheart." The lie came automatically as she coiled Frank Cartwright's rope with hands that still tingled from channeling ancient power. Every movement felt strange now, as if she was operating her body from a distance, just collecting some samples. Emma bounced down the porch steps with energy Sarah hadn't seen in months. The change was miraculous and terrifying, because miracles always came with prices, and Sarah was beginning to understand just how steep this one might be. "Did you find treasure down there?" Emma's eyes sparkled with curiosity that made Sarah's chest ache. "It felt like you found something really important." "Felt like." Sarah studied her daughter's face, noting the way Emma kept glancing toward the well as if she could sense the vast intelligence waiting below. The crystals had done more than heal her lungs. They'd opened some kind of connection between Emma and whatever dwelt in the deep places. Another complication in an already impossible situation. "I found answers," Sarah said carefully, "but they're complicated answers." They walked back to the cabin together, Emma chattering about the coloring book she'd finished and the story she'd started writing about a magic well. Normal 8-year-old things that felt surreal against the backdrop of cosmic negotiations Sarah had just escaped. Inside, Sarah tried to focus on ordinary tasks, checking Emma's temperature, preparing dinner, reviewing their dwindling supplies. But her mind kept drifting to the keeper's offer, the certainty that Emma would be safe, fed, healthy. Never again lying awake listening to her daughter struggle for breath. Never again choosing between medication and groceries. All she had to do was surrender her humanity by degrees. As evening approached, Sarah found herself standing at the kitchen window, staring at the well's rim. No visible glow in the daylight, but she could feel it anyway, patient, eternal, waiting for her decision. The rope lay coiled beside the stones where she'd left it, looking like an ordinary climbing rope and not a lifeline to powers that could reshape their entire existence. "The glowy thing is getting stronger," Emma said quietly from beside her. When had she moved to the window? "It's not just in the well anymore. It's under the whole mountain, isn't it?" Sarah's blood chilled. If Emma was sensing the full scope of what lay beneath them, the connection ran deeper than she'd feared. "What does it feel like to you?" "Like—" Emma pressed her small hand against the window glass, her breath fogging the surface. "Like when you hug me when I'm scared, big and warm and safe. But also really, really old. Older than the trees. Older than everything." She's already halfway connected to them, Sarah realized with a mixture of horror and recognition. The healing hadn't just fixed Emma's lungs, it had made her part of whatever vast network of consciousness existed in the crystal chambers below. Whether Sarah accepted their offer or not, Emma was already touched by forces beyond human understanding. The implications made her lean against the counter for support. If they left now, drove away from this mountain as the keepers had warned, would Emma's connection fade, or would she spend the rest of her life feeling pulled towards something she could never return to? And if the Hollow Ones were real, if supernatural winter was actually coming to this valley, what would happen to the other people living in these mountains? The county clerk who'd been kind to them, the gas station attendant who'd given Emma a free candy bar. Were they all just acceptable casualties in Sarah's decision to protect her own daughter? Outside, shadows lengthened across the yard as the sun sank toward the tree line. Soon it would be dark, and Sarah suspected the choices pressing down on her would only grow heavier with each hour that passed. The temperature dropped 20 degrees as the sun disappeared behind the pine line, and with it came something that made every primitive instinct Sarah possessed scream danger. She was washing dishes when the cold hit, not the crisp mountain autumn she'd grown accustomed to, but something wrong and hungry that seemed to seep through the cabin walls like smoke. The water in the sink turned so frigid it burned her hands. Her breath began to mist, even though the wood stove had been pumping heat all afternoon. "Mom?" Emma's voice carried a tremor Sarah had never heard before. "Something's coming." Sarah spun from the sink, water dripping from her numb fingers. Emma stood frozen by the living room window, no longer the bright, healthy child who'd been chattering about magic wells. Her face was pale, eyes wide and fixed on something beyond the glass that Sarah couldn't see yet. The blue glow from the well erupted skyward like a beacon, piercing the gathering darkness with desperate intensity. And in response, the forest began to change. Sarah rushed to Emma's side and felt her heart stop. The trees were turning silver, not the gentle silver of moonlight, but the cold gleam of metal. As she watched, frost spread across their bark like infection, and their remaining leaves crystallized and shattered, falling like broken glass. "The Hollow Ones," Emma whispered, and Sarah's blood turned to ice water. Her 8-year-old daughter shouldn't know that name, shouldn't speak it with such bone-deep terror. The cold intensified, and through the transformed forest came shapes that hurt to look at directly. Tall, impossibly thin figures that seemed to be cut from the space between stars, moving with fluid grace between trees that continued their terrible transformation. Where they passed, the very air seemed to drain of warmth, of life, of hope. "They're early," Sarah breathed, remembering the keeper's warning about deep snow. But this wasn't weather. This was something far worse. A supernatural winter that devoured everything in its path. Emma grabbed her hand with fingers already growing cold. "They want in, Mum. They want to eat all the warm things." Through the window, Sarah could see the entities testing boundaries she couldn't perceive, pressing against barriers maintained by ancient will and crystal power. The well's blue radiance flared brighter, but even from the cabin she could sense the strain. Whatever defenses the keepers had maintained for decades, they were failing. One of the Hollow Ones turned toward their cabin, and Sarah felt its attention like ice water poured directly into her soul. It had no face that human eyes could process, just hungry emptiness that wanted to drain the warmth from everything living. When it began moving toward them, the frost spread faster, racing across the yard like spilled mercury. The cabin's windows began to fog, then to ice over from the outside. The wood stove guttered and nearly died, its flames shrinking to blue tongues that provided no heat. Emma's breath came in sharp puffs that crystallized and fell to the floor like snow. "Mom, it's so cold." Emma's lips were turning blue despite the healing that had made her strong just hours before. This cold didn't care about healthy lungs or crystal-granted vitality. It wanted to consume life itself. Sarah pulled her daughter away from the window, just as the glass began to crack with geometric patterns that looked almost like the symbols she'd seen carved into the well's depths. But these were their inverse, angles that hurt to perceive, mathematics of entropy and ending. The front door rattled on its hinges, though no wind blew. The rattling grew more insistent, and Sarah realized with horror that the Hollow Ones weren't trying to break in through force. They were patient, inexorable. They would simply drain all warmth from the cabin until she and Emma froze to death, then feed on whatever remained. This is it, she realized. This is the choice. Not tomorrow, not when I'm ready. Right now. Blue light from the well pulsed frantically, and Sarah felt the Keeper's presence pressing against her consciousness like a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman. She could sense their desperation, their ancient power stretched to its breaking point against an assault that had come too soon. Choose, their voice whispered in her mind, no longer patient but urgent with cosmic panic. Choose now, or watch everything end in ice and hunger. Emma collapsed against her, small body shaking with cold that no human child should survive. Her daughter's eyes were losing focus, the healing light the crystals had granted flickering like a candle in a hurricane. Outside, the Hollow Ones pressed closer, and frost began spreading across the cabin's inner walls. Sarah looked down at Emma's face, still so young, so trusting, so completely dependent on her mother's decision. There was no time left for weighing consequences or calculating costs. There was only the immediate reality of supernatural winter and entities that fed on warmth and life, and the stark choice between accepting otherworldly bargains or watching her daughter die. The well's light called to her, and Sarah finally understood that some decisions could only be made in the crucible of absolute necessity. Sarah made her choice. With Emma's frozen breath crystallizing against her neck, she ran for the door. The cold hit them like a physical blow as they stumbled into the transformed yard, but she forced her legs to move toward the well's desperate blue beacon. Behind them, the Hollow One's attention sharpened with predatory interest, and the temperature plummeted further. "Hold on, baby," Sarah gasped, her words forming ice crystals that shattered as they fell. Emma's weight felt wrong in her arms. Too light, too cold, as if the entities were already draining the life from her small body. She reached the well's edge and grabbed Frank Cartwright's rope with hands so numb she could barely feel the fibers. The blue light surged upward around them, creating a pocket of relative warmth, but Sarah could sense the Keeper's strain. Their ancient power was failing against an assault they hadn't expected for months yet. Too late, the voice in her mind carried exhausted despair. The barriers break. We cannot hold them. "I accept," Sarah shouted into the well's depths, her voice cracking with desperation. "I accept your offer. Take me, just save her." For a heartbeat, silence. Then the blue light exploded outward with such intensity that the Hollow Ones recoiled, their forms wavering like disturbed smoke. Sarah felt power rushing up from impossible depths, ready to flow through her, ready to make her the guardian they needed. But as the crystal energy touched her consciousness, Emma convulsed in her arms. The healing that had made her daughter strong, the connection that let her sense the ancient presence beneath the mountain, it was incompatible with the bargain Sarah was trying to make. Emma's 8-year-old mind couldn't process the vast intelligence trying to merge with her mother's consciousness. The feedback was tearing her apart from the inside. "Stop!" Sarah screamed. "Something's wrong." Emma's eyes rolled back, showing only white, and seizures racked her small frame. Blood trickled from her nose, freezing instantly in the supernatural cold. The very power meant to save them was killing her daughter. The child cannot bear the connection. The Keeper's voice carried anguish that spanned millennia. She is too young, too fragile. To complete the binding now would shatter her mind. Then break it off. Stop the process. We cannot. The Hollow Ones have breached the outer barriers. Without a guardian, they will consume everything on this mountain. Your daughter, the forest, every living thing for miles. Sarah felt the cosmic choice collapsing into impossible paradox. Accept the bargain and watch Emma die from psychic overload. Refuse it and watch her freeze to death as the Hollow Ones drained all warmth from the world. Either path led to the same destination, her daughter's death and her own complete failure as a mother. The entities pressed closer, frost racing across the well's stone rim. Emma's breathing grew shallow, her lips turning blue-black. The seizures intensified. There has to be another way. But even as Sarah spoke, she felt the Keeper's power faltering. The blue light flickered like a dying bulb, and supernatural winter began creeping into their pocket of warmth. Perhaps, the ancient voice whispered, if you had chosen sooner. If the child had not been touched by our essence first. But now it was too late. The healing they'd given Emma had created a connection too deep to sever safely, but too fragile to withstand the transformation that would make Sarah their guardian. She was trapped between outcomes that would destroy her daughter, while entities that fed on life itself closed in around them. Emma went limp in her arms, her breathing so faint Sarah had to press her ear to her daughter's chest to detect any heartbeat at all. The small body that had been vibrant with health just hours ago was shutting down, caught between forces too vast for human physiology to survive. Please, Sarah whispered to whatever powers might be listening. Please, not her. Take me instead. Take whatever you want from me, but let her live. But the blue light continued to fade, and the Hollow One's hunger pressed against her mind like ice picks driven through her skull. Emma's pulse fluttered weakly against her fingertips, growing fainter with each passing second. The rope hung beside them, leading down into depths where crystal power waited to save everyone, except the one person who mattered most. Above them, stars emerged in a sky that was growing colder by the moment, winter that would last until everything warm and living had been consumed. Sarah held her dying daughter at the edge of a well that contained miracles she couldn't use, while ancient entities waited for her to make a choice that no longer existed. Every path forward led to Emma's death. Every bargain available would destroy the child she was desperate to protect. The mountain wind carried the sound of ice forming on trees that had been green that morning, and Sarah finally understood that some problems had no solutions, only different kinds of loss. The moment stretched like eternity, Emma's heartbeat fading against Sarah's palm, while cosmic forces tore at the edges of reality. Then, in the space between one dying breath and the next, Sarah felt something shift inside her, not the crystal power trying to force its way in, but something that had always been there, waiting. Her geological training kicked in with sudden, blazing clarity. The Keepers had been trying to make her their guardian, forcing ancient consciousness into a human mind never designed to hold it. But what if the problem wasn't her willingness to accept their power? What if it was their fundamental misunderstanding of what she was? "You're doing this wrong," Sarah said aloud, her voice cutting through the supernatural cold with unexpected steadiness. The Hollow Ones paused in their advance, perhaps sensing the change in her tone. "You're trying to pour yourselves into me like I'm an empty vessel. But I'm not empty. I'm a geologist." The blue light flickered with confusion. "We do not understand. You've been alone down there so long you forgot how partnership works." Sarah shifted Emma's weight, feeling her daughter's pulse stabilize slightly, as if responding to her mother's newfound certainty. "You don't need a guardian to contain your power. You need a translator, someone who speaks both languages, crystal and human, deep time and immediate need." Impossible. Humans cannot comprehend our existence without being transformed, yes. You keep saying that. Sarah looked down at Emma's pale face, then back toward the well's depths. "But you're thinking like beings who measure time in epochs. What if the solution isn't making me more like you, but learning to work with what I already am?" The revelation hit her with the force of tectonic plates shifting. The Keepers weren't just crystalline entities, they were geology itself, the slow intelligence of mineral formation and mountain building, and she was Sarah Chen, who had spent her career studying the intersection between geological processes and human habitation, translating the Earth's deep stories into terms people could understand. "Emma isn't dying because she's too fragile," Sarah continued, pieces clicking into place with crystalline clarity. "She's dying because you're trying to force a connection that should be collaborative. Let me mediate. Let me be the bridge between your consciousness and ours." She could feel the ancient beings considering, their attention shifting from desperate force to careful evaluation. In that moment of consideration, the Hollow Ones pressed closer, sensing weakness in the failing barriers. "Decide now," Sarah said firmly. "Trust me to do what I was trained for, or watch everything burn." Would risk yourself without transformation, without guarantees? I've been risking myself since the day I became a mother. Sarah pulled Emma tighter against her chest, feeling the faint flutter of her daughter's heartbeat. "But I'm not doing this alone, and I'm not doing it your way. We do this as partners, or we don't do it at all." The blue light pulsed once, twice, and then something unprecedented happened. Instead of trying to flood into Sarah's consciousness, the Keeper's power wrapped around her like a supportive framework, not replacing her humanity, but amplifying her existing skills. She felt her geological knowledge expanding, gaining new dimensions as crystal-deep wisdom merged with hard-earned scientific training. The sensation was like learning a language she'd always known fragments of. Suddenly, the mountain's deep structure made perfect sense, from the surface soil down to the crystalline chambers that housed consciousness older than recorded history. She could feel the stress points where the Hollow Ones pressed against reality, understand the energy flows that maintained the barriers, see exactly what needed to be done. Most importantly, she could do it without losing herself in the process. Sarah stood, Emma secure in her arms, and for the first time since discovering the well, felt completely in control of the situation. The Keeper's power flowed through her like electricity through copper wire, contained, directed, purposeful. She was still human, still a mother, still Sarah Chen. But now she was also something new, a conscious bridge between two forms of intelligence that had been trying to communicate across an impossible gap. "Emma," she said softly, and her daughter's eyes fluttered open, no longer showing the whites. The seizures had stopped. The dangerous feedback loop was broken. "How do you feel?" "Like the mountain is singing," Emma whispered, wonder replacing the earlier terror in her voice. "And you're helping it remember the words." Sarah looked toward the Hollow Ones, who had frozen at the forest's edge, as if sensing the fundamental shift in the balance of power. Through her new awareness, she could perceive them clearly for the first time, not entities of pure hunger, but symptoms of an imbalance that had been growing for decades. She finally understood what needed to be done. And for the first time since buying this cabin, she knew exactly how to do it. The partnership between crystal consciousness and human determination wasn't just possible. It was the solution both species had been searching for without knowing it. The partnership settled into Sarah's consciousness like pieces of a complex geological puzzle finally clicking together. Emma's breathing steadied in her arms, the dangerous seizures replaced by calm wonder as she watched the blue light dance around them in protective spirals. But Sarah knew this was only the beginning. They had stopped the immediate crisis, but the Hollow Ones still pressed against the forest's edge, waiting. "Show me," Sarah said to the Keepers, her voice carrying new authority. "Show me how the barriers really work." The mountain's deep structure unfolded in her mind like a three-dimensional map. She could see the crystalline chambers extending through bedrock for miles, creating a network of power that had maintained balance for generations. The Hollow Ones weren't invaders. They were a natural force, entropy given consciousness, necessary for cosmic equilibrium. But something had disrupted that balance, allowing them to press into areas where they didn't belong. "The original homesteader," Sarah breathed, understanding flooding through her. "He didn't just vanish in 1962. He broke something." "Yes," the Keepers confirmed. "Thomas Brennan. He found our chambers, but sought to claim our power for himself alone. When he tried to force dominion over us, the backlash shattered the containment protocols. We managed to restore partial barriers, but they have been failing ever since. Through her enhanced perception, Sarah could see the crack in reality that Brennan's greed had created, a weak point where the boundary between realms had never properly healed. The Hollow Ones weren't breaking in. They were seeping through a wound that had been festering for 60 years. "Emma," Sarah said gently, setting her daughter down but keeping one hand on her shoulder. "I need you to help me with something very important." "Can you feel the mountain singing?" Emma nodded, her eyes bright with crystalline reflection. "It's like a broken song. Some of the notes are missing." "Exactly. We're going to help it remember the whole melody." Sarah knelt to meet her daughter's eyes. "But I need you to stay right here by the well, where the light is strongest. What we're about to do might get scary, but you have to trust me. Can you do that? Are you going to make the cold things go away? We're going to fix what's broken so they can go back where they belong." Sarah stood, feeling power flow through the partnership she'd forged with ancient intelligence. "They're not evil, sweetheart. They're just lost." The Keeper's consciousness merged seamlessly with her geological training, showing her how to read the stress patterns in the Earth itself. The solution wasn't to fight the Hollow Ones directly, it was to repair the fundamental breach that allowed them access to this realm, like fixing a geological fault before it could trigger an earthquake. Sarah walked to the forest's edge, feeling the temperature drop with each step. The Hollow Ones towered above her, their forms rippling with hunger and confusion. This close, she could sense their true nature, beings of necessary ending, cosmic recyclers who returned energy to the void so new things could be born. Beautiful in their own alien way, but catastrophically misplaced. "You don't belong here," she told them, her voice carrying harmonics that made the air itself vibrate. "But that's not your fault." The nearest entity turned its attention to her, and Sarah felt its confusion like winter fog rolling through her mind. It recognized the Keeper's power flowing through her, but also something new, human flexibility, the ability to adapt and bridge differences. "Show them," the Keepers urged. Sarah reached out with her consciousness, following crystalline pathways down through bedrock to the wounded space, where Thomas Brennan's greed had torn reality. The damage was extensive, but not irreparable, like a complex fracture in living rock that could still be mended with proper understanding of geological forces. She began to work, using her partnership with the Keepers to redirect energy flows through the mountain's deep structure. It required precise calibration, like tuning a massive instrument where each adjustment affected harmonics throughout the entire system. Too much force, and she'd create new fractures. Too little, and the breach would continue spreading. The Hollow Ones sensed what she was doing and moved closer, but not with aggression. They seemed to recognize that she was trying to restore balance rather than destroy them. The supernatural cold intensified as more entities emerged from between the silver trees, but Sarah maintained her focus on the delicate work of cosmic repair. Emma's voice drifted across the clearing, humming a wordless melody that somehow matched the frequencies Sarah was using to heal the breach. Her daughter was unconsciously harmonizing with the mountain's restored song, adding human warmth to crystalline precision. "Almost," the Keepers whispered. "The pattern holds." Sarah felt the broken space beginning to seal, reality knitting itself back together like bone healing stronger at the breakpoint. The Hollow Ones flickered, their forms becoming less substantial as the inappropriate connection to this realm weakened. But she could also sense their relief. They had been trapped here just as much as everyone else had been threatened by them. When the breach finally sealed with a resonance that shook snow from distant peaks, the entities began dissolving back into the spaces between stars where they belonged. The silver trees returned to their natural colors, frost melting in moments as warmth rushed back into the world. The warmth that rushed back into the world felt almost tropical after the supernatural winter, but Sarah barely noticed. As the last of the Hollow Ones faded into their proper realm, she felt the mountain's deep structure settling into patterns it hadn't known for 60 years. The wound Thomas Brennan had torn in reality was finally healed, sealed not with force but with understanding. Emma ran to her side, no longer pale and trembling but glowing with health that seemed to radiate from within. "Mama, you fixed the song. The mountain sounds happy now." Sarah pulled her daughter close, marveling at how natural the partnership with the keepers felt now that the crisis had passed. Their ancient consciousness remained intertwined with hers, not as an invasive presence, but as a collaborative enhancement to abilities she'd always possessed. She could feel the crystalline chambers humming contentedly deep beneath their feet, power flowing in proper channels for the first time in decades. But as the immediate danger faded, the weight of what lay ahead began to settle on her shoulders like a mantle she couldn't remove. "The balance is restored," the keepers whispered in her mind, their voice carrying gratitude that spanned geological epochs. "The breach is sealed. The mountain is whole." "And the guardianship?" Sarah asked, though she already knew the answer. The partnership they'd forged couldn't simply be undone now that the crisis was over. She had become something new, still human, still herself, but permanently changed by the connection to intelligence that measured time in millennia. "You are bound to us now, as we are bound to you. The choice you made tonight cannot be unmade." Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with supernatural cold. She looked down at Emma, who was humming contentedly while watching the last traces of blue light dance around the well's rim. Her daughter seemed unaffected by the revelation, but Sarah understood with growing clarity what she had committed them both to. She was no longer just a former geology professor trying to rebuild her life. She was the guardian of something vast and powerful, responsible for maintaining a balance that could affect the entire region. The crystalline chambers would need monitoring. The ancient patterns would require constant attention, and if another Thomas Brennan appeared, if someone else tried to exploit the mountain's power for personal gain, she would be the one who had to stop them. "What does this mean for us?" she asked aloud, her voice carrying across the clearing. "For Emma? For any kind of normal life?" "Normal is a human concept," the keepers replied. "But necessary things rarely come without cost. You have saved countless lives tonight, not just your daughters, but everyone who would have perished if the hollow ones had been allowed to spread. The mountain's power is yours to wield, but also yours to protect." Emma tugged at her jacket. "Mama, are we going to stay here? In the cabin?" Sarah looked back through the trees toward their ramshackle home, its windows glowing warmly in the distance. Just this morning, she'd been worried about fixing the roof before winter, about finding enough money to keep them fed and warm. Those problems seemed almost quaint now compared to the cosmic responsibilities settling around her like chains made of starlight. "Yes, sweetheart, we're going to stay." The words carried the weight of prophecy. Not because they had to anymore, but because someone needed to guard this place. Someone had to ensure that the balance she'd fought so hard to restore would remain intact. "There will be others," the keepers warned. "The power here calls to those who seek easy answers to difficult problems. They will come seeking what Thomas Brennan sought, dominion over forces they cannot understand. You must be ready." Sarah felt the truth of it in her bones. The tax auction that had sold this property for $1 hadn't been coincidence. It had been the mountain's way of drawing someone capable of becoming its guardian. But other seekers would follow different paths. Some would come with good intentions corrupted by desperation. Others would arrive already twisted by greed. All of them would be her responsibility to evaluate, guide, or if necessary, stop. "Will I be strong enough?" she asked, thinking not just of future threats, but of raising Emma in a place where reality bent around crystalline power. "You were strong enough tonight," the keepers replied. "Strength is not the question. Wisdom is, and wisdom comes through choice, not force." Emma had wandered back to the well's edge, peering down into depths that now glowed with gentle blue radiance instead of the harsh brilliance of crisis. "Mama, look! The pretty lights are making pictures." Sarah joined her daughter at the stone rim and saw what she meant. The crystalline formations far below were shifting and flowing, creating patterns that seemed to tell stories, geological history written in living light. Her enhanced perception could read some of it. The mountain's formation, the first appearance of the keeper's consciousness, the long centuries of balance before Brennan's destructive ambition. But there were new patterns forming too, spiraling up from the depths like promises. Emma's future intertwining with ancient power. Sarah's own evolution from desperate single mother to something unprecedented, a human consciousness that could speak fluent geology, bridging the gap between human needs and cosmic forces. The road back to their cabin had never seemed longer, weighted as it was with knowledge that their real journey was just beginning. The morning after sealing the breach, Sarah woke to find Emma standing at their cabin window, staring out at the forest, with an expression far too knowing for an 8-year-old. Frost glittered on the pine needles, but it was natural frost now, winter's honest arrival rather than supernatural invasion. "They're coming, Mama," Emma said without turning around. "I can feel them in the mountain's song. 3 cars on the access road." Sarah's enhanced awareness confirmed what her daughter sensed. Through her partnership with the keepers, she could perceive the approaching vehicles like discordant notes in the crystalline harmony that now flowed constantly through her consciousness. The first car carried academic curiosity, someone who had detected the energy fluctuations from last night's cosmic repair work. The second held desperate hunger, a soul as damaged as Thomas Brennan's had been. The third radiated something worse: cold calculation, military precision, the kind of institutional interest that would see the mountain's power as a weapon to be controlled. "This is it," Sarah whispered, understanding flooding through her with geological certainty. The real test wasn't healing ancient wounds or banishing cosmic threats. It was this, learning to be human while wielding power that could reshape reality, making split-second decisions that would determine whether the Keeper's gift became salvation or catastrophe. They arrive separately, but their presence here is connected, the Keepers confirmed. The restoration of balance has sent ripples through dimensions beyond the physical. Some who sense these changes seek understanding. Others seek dominion. Sarah moved to the kitchen, her hands steady as she prepared coffee with practiced normalcy while her mind processed threats that existed on multiple planes of reality. Everything she'd learned, from her geological training to her desperate mother's intuition, from scientific method to the hard-won wisdom of survival, would be tested in the next few hours. "Get dressed, sweetheart," she told Emma, keeping her voice calm despite the cosmic weight settling on her shoulders. "We are going to have visitors, and some of them might not understand how special this place is." Emma nodded with the solemnity of a child who had watched her mother seal breaches in reality. "Should I hide?" "No hiding. But stay close, and if I tell you to go to the well, you run there immediately. The Keepers will protect you in the chambers if necessary." Through the window, Sarah watched the first car navigate the rutted access road, a battered Honda Civic that spoke of academic poverty and desperate curiosity. "Dr. Marcus Webb," her enhanced perception whispered, reading the quantum signatures of obsession and wonder that surrounded the vehicle's driver. A seismologist from University of Washington who had spent the night chasing energy readings that shouldn't exist anywhere on Earth. The second car followed 20 minutes behind, a black SUV with windows too dark and lines too aggressive for civilian use. Colonel Jennifer Hayes, recently retired from a military program that officially didn't exist, carrying scars from experiments in weaponized paranormal research. She had felt the mountain's power from 3 states away, and driven through the night to reach its source. The third vehicle wouldn't arrive for another hour, but Sarah could already sense its approach. Another SUV, but this one carrying a full team. Government contractors who had been tracking anomalous geological events as potential threats to national security. They would arrive expecting to find either a hoax to debunk or a phenomenon to contain. Each represents a different path forward, the Keepers observed. The curious academic might become an ally if approached with wisdom. The damaged soldier seeks redemption through power, but could be guided toward healing. The institutional response will try to turn this place into a laboratory or a weapon, Sarah finished grimly. She understood now why the mountain had chosen her, not just for her geological knowledge or her mother's determination, but for her experience navigating the intersection between scientific discovery and human need. Her years teaching undergraduate geology had taught her how to translate complex concepts into terms people could accept. Her months as a waitress had shown her how to read people quickly, to distinguish genuine need from dangerous entitlement. The Honda Civic pulled to a stop beside their cabin, and Dr. Webb emerged, a thin man in his 50s with wild grey hair and eyes bright with the kind of fervor that could become either breakthrough or breakdown. Sarah watched him approach, her enhanced senses reading the layers of desperation beneath his academic excitement. His funding had been cut, his theories dismissed, his career hanging by threads as thin as spider silk. This was where everything she'd learned would be tested. Could she convince him that some discoveries were too important to publish? Could she offer him truth without revealing the full scope of what lay beneath their mountain? Could she transform a potential threat into an ally without compromising the ancient balance she'd sworn to protect? Sarah Chen opened the door, Emma at her side, and stepped forward to meet the first test of her guardianship. The mountain hummed beneath their feet, crystalline consciousness waiting to see whether its new protector possessed the wisdom to navigate the space between revelation and destruction. "Dr. Webb, I presume," Sarah said, stepping onto the cabin's small porch. Her enhanced awareness read the man's emotional signature like geological strata, layers of scientific excitement over bedrock desperation, with hairline fractures of doubt running through both. Webb froze mid-step, his eyes widening as he registered her use of his name. "How did you?" He caught himself squaring his shoulders with academic dignity. "I'm tracking seismic anomalies. The readings I detected last night originated from this location." "I know." Sarah kept her voice level, feeling the keeper's consciousness flowing through her perception like underground rivers. Through their enhanced senses, she could see the man's aura flickering between brilliant curiosity and the dark hunger of a career scientist facing professional extinction. "The question is, what you plan to do with that information?" Emma pressed closer to her side, and Sarah felt her daughter's natural empathy reading Dr. Webb's emotions with disturbing accuracy. 8 years old, and already learning to navigate the intersection between human desperation and cosmic power. "I plan to document it," Webb said, pulling a tablet from his jacket. "Whatever geological phenomenon caused those energy signatures could revolutionize our understanding of—" "No." The word carried harmonics that made the air itself vibrate, stopping Webb mid-sentence. Sarah felt power flowing through her voice, not threatening but absolutely immovable. Some discoveries aren't meant for publication. Webb's face flushed red. "You can't suppress scientific inquiry. If there's something here that could advance human knowledge, then it needs to be protected from humans who would exploit it." Sarah stepped down from the porch, and Dr. Webb instinctively backed away as he registered something beyond normal authority in her presence. "Tell me, Doctor, what happened to the last researcher who made a career-defining discovery on this mountain?" The question hit Webb like a physical blow. Sarah watched understanding flicker across his features as fragments of local history assembled themselves into terrifying possibility. Thomas Brennan's disappearance in 1962, the government's seals on his research, the decades of silence surrounding this particular section of the Cascade Range. "You know what happened here," Webb whispered. "I know what happens to people who try to claim power they don't understand." Sarah's enhanced perception caught the rumble of the second vehicle climbing the access road. Colonel Hayes, driven by different demons, but equally dangerous in her own way. "The question is whether you're wise enough to learn from their mistakes." Webb's tablet slipped from nerveless fingers as the full implications crashed over him. His readings hadn't just detected an anomaly, they'd led him to something that had already consumed better researchers than himself. The academic fervor in his eyes flickered and went out, replaced by the animal recognition of a creature that had wandered into a predator's territory. "What are you?" he breathed. Sarah felt Emma's small hand slip into hers, anchoring her to human warmth even as cosmic consciousness flowed through her awareness. This was the moment, the choice between revelation and destruction, between recruiting an ally and creating an enemy. "I'm someone who learned to ask better questions," she said finally. "Not, what can I take from this place?" But what does this place need from me? The sound of the approaching SUV grew louder, and Sarah's expression hardened, and right now, it needs protection from people who would turn wonder into weaponry. Webb followed her gaze toward the access road, where dust clouds marked Colonel Hayes's aggressive ascent. Military efficiency, institutional resources, the kind of force that could transform their quiet mountain into a classified research facility within days. "She'll have detection equipment," Webb said, his academic instincts overriding personal fear. "Government funding. If you're trying to hide something here—" "I'm not hiding anything," Sarah interrupted. "I'm protecting it. There's a difference." She turned back to Webb, and he flinched at the intensity in her eyes, human determination backed by something vast and patient and utterly implacable. "The question is whether you'll help me or whether you'll become part of the problem I have to solve." The black SUV crested the final rise, and Sarah felt Colonel Hayes's presence like a dark star in the keeper's perception. Military discipline wrapped around a core of desperate need, seeking redemption through the same kind of power that had destroyed Thomas Brennan. Two tests approached simultaneously. The keepers whispered in her mind. The academic, who could become teacher or threat. The soldier who seeks healing through dominion. Choose your allies wisely. Sarah squeezed Emma's hand once, then released it. "Go to the well, sweetheart. Stay where the light is strongest. Mama. Trust me." Emma nodded and ran toward the stone circle, where blue radiance danced just beneath perception. Dr. Webb watched her go with dawning comprehension, finally understanding that whatever he'd stumbled into was far beyond simple geological anomalies. The SUV's engine cut off, and boots hit gravel with military precision. Sarah Chen stood alone between the approaching forces, feeling the mountain's power flowing through her like molten stone, preparing for a confrontation that would determine whether humanity's first contact with crystalline consciousness became salvation or catastrophe. The sacrifice. Colonel Jennifer Hayes emerged from the black SUV with the controlled movements of someone accustomed to entering hostile territory. Her grey hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her civilian clothes couldn't disguise the military bearing that had been carved into her bones by 3 decades of service. Sarah's enhanced perception read the woman's emotional signature immediately, layers of professional competence wrapped around a core of desperate guilt, seeking redemption through the same kind of power that had destroyed her last command. "Ma'am," Hayes said, approaching with careful respect that didn't quite mask the predatory assessment in her eyes. "I'm Dr. Hayes. I'm investigating unusual energy readings that originated from this location." "Doctor of what?" Sarah asked, though she already knew. The keepers whispered the woman's history through their connection. Classified programs, experiments with weaponized phenomena, soldiers lost to forces that military science couldn't control or contain. Theoretical physics, applied to defense applications. Hayes glanced at Dr. Webb, who stood frozen between academic curiosity and growing terror. "I assume you're here for similar reasons, Dr. Webb. Your seismic monitoring network flagged the same anomalies I detected." Webb nodded mutely, still processing the implications of Sarah's earlier warnings. The mountain hummed beneath their feet, and Sarah felt the crystalline consciousness stirring with something like concern. The convergence of seekers wasn't coincidence. The power released during last night's healing had sent ripples through dimensions beyond the physical, drawing those who fed on such energies like moths to a flame. "The readings were off the charts," Hayes continued, her voice taking on the fervor of someone describing a personal obsession. "Energy signatures consistent with zero-point field manipulation. Quantum coherence on a macroscopic scale. If there's a natural phenomenon here that could be studied, replicated, weaponized," Sarah finished grimly. Hayes's mask of academic interest slipped, revealing the haunted desperation beneath. "Not weaponized, understood, controlled. There are applications that could save lives, prevent the kind of catastrophic failures that—" She stopped abruptly, but Sarah had already read the memories bleeding through her emotional shields. "She commanded a facility in Nevada," the keepers whispered. 17 soldiers dead when they tried to harness what they called exotic energy sources. She carries their names like stones in her heart. Sarah felt a moment of unexpected sympathy. Hayes wasn't driven by greed like Thomas Brennan had been, or by academic ambition like Webb. She was seeking redemption, trying to transform her failure into something that could honor her fallen soldiers. It made her more dangerous than either of the others, because good intentions could justify any level of destruction. "The people you lost," Sarah said quietly. "They died because someone tried to force cooperation from something that required partnership." Hayes went rigid. "How could you possibly know?" "Because I know what's sleeping under this mountain. And I know what happens when people try to claim it instead of earning it." Sarah's enhanced senses caught the approach of the third vehicle, still 20 minutes away but close enough that she could feel its occupant's cold institutional purpose like a gathering storm. Time was running out for anything resembling negotiation. The sound of running footsteps made all three adults turn. Emma burst from the tree line, her face pale with urgency. "Mama, the pretty lights are getting scared. They can feel the bad people coming." Webb stared at the child with dawning comprehension. The energy source, it's responsive, conscious. More than conscious, Sarah confirmed. Ancient, protective, and very, very powerful. She looked between Webb and Hayes, weighing possibilities with the speed of someone who had learned to make life-or-death decisions in seconds. "You want to understand what's here? Fine. But understanding requires sacrifice." "What kind of sacrifice?" Hayes demanded. Sarah felt the mountain's power flowing through her, crystalline consciousness offering strength for what came next. This was the moment she'd been preparing for without knowing it, the choice between keeping her family safe and protecting something infinitely larger. Your careers, your ambitions, your need to be the one who makes the great discovery. She gestured toward Emma, who had moved to stand beside the well where blue radiance pulsed just beneath perception. "I was a geology professor. I lost everything, my job, my house, my entire life. I came here with $800 in desperation, thinking I was buying shelter. Instead, I found purpose. The distant sound of engines grew stronger. The institutional response, arriving with resources that could overwhelm any individual resistance. They'll turn this place into a laboratory," Webb whispered, understanding flooding his features. "Government contracts, military applications. Everything you're trying to protect will be dissected and destroyed." Sarah nodded grimly. "Unless we stop them. But stopping them means choosing this place over everything else you thought you wanted from your lives." Hayes was staring at Emma, reading the subtle signs that spoke of a child who had been touched by forces beyond human understanding. The energy field, it's already affected her, integrated with her, not affected, partnered. Sarah felt tears she hadn't expected burning her eyes as the true cost of her guardianship crystallized. Emma will never have a normal childhood now. She'll grow up knowing things that most adults couldn't accept. She'll carry responsibilities that children shouldn't have to bear. I chose to save her life, and in doing so, I changed her life forever. The sacrifice wasn't just career or ambition or the comfortable illusion of scientific objectivity. It was the future she'd dreamed of giving her daughter. Safety, normalcy, the chance to grow up innocent of cosmic responsibilities. But as Emma smiled up at her with eyes that held starlight, Sarah knew she would make the same choice again. The engines fell silent one by one, but the quiet that followed felt like the held breath before an avalanche. Sarah watched the dust settle around the third SUV as government contractors emerged, 6 figures in identical dark suits, moving with the coordinated precision of a tactical team. Their leader, a woman with steel-gray hair and eyes like winter sky, surveyed the scene with calculating detachment. "Dr. Hayes, Dr. Webb." The woman's voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to classified briefings and national security clearances. "I'm Director Morrison, Department of Energy Special Projects. We need to discuss the anomalous readings detected from this location." Sarah felt the mountain's consciousness recoil. crystalline awareness recognizing the institutional hunger that had consumed so many wonders before. Through the Keeper's enhanced perception, she read Morrison's emotional signature, cold ambition wrapped in patriotic justification, seeking power that could be catalogued, contained, and controlled. "There's nothing here to discuss," Sarah said, stepping forward. Emma moved closer to her side, and Dr. Webb surprised everyone by shifting to place himself between the child and the government team. Morrison's gaze fixed on Webb with laser intensity. "Doctor, your seismic monitoring network recorded energy signatures exceeding background levels by several thousand%. That kind of phenomenon represents either a significant threat or a strategic opportunity. Either way, it falls under federal jurisdiction." "No," Webb said, his voice stronger than Sarah had expected. "Some discoveries transcend jurisdiction." He glanced at Hayes, who stood frozen between her military conditioning and the growing certainty that she'd seen this moment before. "We can't let what happened in Nevada happen again." Hayes flinched as if struck. Morrison's eyes narrowed with predatory interest. Nevada was an unfortunate accident caused by inadequate safety protocols. "We've refined our containment procedures since then." "Containment," Sarah repeated, letting the word hang in the air like a death sentence. "You want to put a cage around something that's been free since before your civilization existed." The blue radiance around the well pulsed brighter, responding to the emotional tension crackling through the mountain air. Emma pressed against Sarah's side, her enhanced empathy reading the fear and determination radiating from each adult. 8 years old, and already learning that some battles were fought not with weapons but with the courage to stand between predators and prey. Morrison gestured to her team, who began unpacking detection equipment with practiced efficiency. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you and your daughter to step away from the suspected energy source while we conduct our preliminary assessment." "No." The word carried harmonics that made the ancient stones beneath their feet vibrate in response. Morrison's team froze as their instruments registered readings that shouldn't have been possible from human vocal cords. "This is my property, legally purchased. You have no right." "Emergency powers supersede property rights when national security is involved," Morrison interrupted. "We can do this cooperatively, or we can obtain a federal warrant and return with sufficient resources to secure the area by force." Dr. Webb stepped forward, his academic credentials carrying weight even in this surreal confrontation. "Director Morrison, I've spent 30 years studying geological phenomena. What you're detecting here isn't just an energy source, it's a living system. Threatening it could trigger responses that make Nevada look like a laboratory accident." Hayes finally found her voice, memories of 17 dead soldiers burning in her eyes. "Marcus is right. The readings I'm getting suggest consciousness, not just power, complex intelligence operating on scales we don't understand. If we approach this wrong..." "We'll approach it professionally," Morrison said sharply, "with proper protocols and adequate safeguards." She nodded to her team, who resumed their setup despite the mountain's growing agitation. Sarah felt the crystalline consciousness stirring beneath them, ancient patience finally reaching its limits. The Keepers had watched civilizations rise and fall, had seen countless examples of institutional arrogance destroying what it sought to claim. They would not allow their mountain sanctuary to become another Nevada. "The choice is before you." Their whispered voices flowed through Sarah's awareness. "Reveal our true nature and risk everything, or watch them reduce wonder to data points until nothing remains but measurements of what we used to be." Sarah looked at Emma, at Webb's growing determination, at Hayes's haunted recognition of a mistake about to repeat itself. Then she looked at Morrison's team assembling equipment that would probe and dissect, and ultimately destroy everything the mountain protected. The sacrifice she'd made to save her daughter had been only the beginning. Now she faced a larger choice, between the illusion of safety through cooperation and the dangerous necessity of absolute resistance. "Emma," she said quietly, "show them." Her daughter nodded solemnly and walked to the well's edge. As she placed her small hands on the ancient stones, blue radiance erupted skyward in a column of living light that turned the autumn morning into something from dreams. Morrison's instruments exploded in showers of sparks. The real negotiation was about to begin. The column of blue light pulsed once more, before gradually dimming, leaving the morning air charged with possibilities that made everyone's skin tingle. Morrison's team stood frozen amid their smoking equipment, faces pale with the recognition that they had encountered something far beyond their protocols. The mountains settled into watchful silence, ancient consciousness waiting to see what choices would emerge from this moment of revelation. Emma stepped back from the well, her small hand finding Sarah's with the easy trust of a child who had learned to navigate miracles. The crystalline radiance faded to its subtle background hum, but the message had been delivered with unmistakable clarity. This was not a phenomenon to be contained or controlled. Director Morrison stared at the wreckage of her instruments, institutional certainty cracking like ice in spring sunshine. What? How is that possible? It's possible because some things choose to remain free, Sarah said quietly. Through the keeper's connection, she felt the mountain's approval, not of destruction, but of boundaries clearly established. You came here planning to cage something that's been protecting this land since before your government existed. The question now is whether you're wise enough to learn a different approach. Dr. Webb knelt beside one of the destroyed sensors, his academic mind already working to process what he had witnessed. The energy discharge was precisely calibrated. It destroyed electronics without harming biological systems. He looked up at Emma with something approaching awe. That level of discrimination requires intelligence, purpose. Hayes moved closer, her military bearing softened by recognition. The consciousness you mentioned, it's not hostile, it's defensive, protecting itself and its territory. She glanced at Morrison, then made a visible choice. Jennifer Hayes, formerly Colonel, 49th Experimental Physics Division. I'm officially advising against any attempt to secure this location by force. Morrison's jaw tightened. Colonel, your security clearance may have been revoked, but mine hasn't. I have authority. You have authority over weapons and threats, Sarah interrupted. This isn't either. It's a partnership, a symbiotic relationship that requires trust, not dominance. She felt Emma's hand squeeze hers, drawing strength from their connection even as she offered guidance to others. The mountain chose to protect my daughter when she was dying. In return, we became guardians, protectors, not exploiters. The blue radiance around the well brightened subtly, responding to Sarah's words with something like contentment. Morrison watched the display with calculating eyes, her institutional training warring against the evidence of her senses. If what you're claiming is true, Morrison said slowly, then this represents first contact with a non-human intelligence. That makes it an even more critical national security issue. Webb stood, brushing dirt from his knees with hands that trembled slightly. Director, I've spent my career studying the Earth's geology. What I've witnessed here suggests we need to radically revise our understanding of what constitutes life, consciousness, even planetary evolution. He gestured toward the well, where ancient stones seemed to pulse with their own inner light. This isn't something to be studied in a laboratory. It's something to be learned from. Sarah felt the moment balanced on a knife's edge, the choice between cooperation and confrontation, between wonder preserved and mystery destroyed. Through the crystalline connection, she sensed other consciousnesses stirring in distant mountains, ancient guardians watching to see how humanity would respond to this revelation. I'll make you an offer, she said, addressing Morrison directly. Send your reports. Tell your superiors what you found here. But recommend observation, not intervention. Study from a distance, with respect rather than force. She paused, letting the weight of consequence settle. Because if you return with armies and excavation equipment, you'll find nothing but empty stone and silent forest. The consciousness you want to understand will simply withdraw. Morrison's expression flickered between frustration and fascination. You're asking me to recommend hands-off observation of potentially the most significant discovery in human history. I'm asking you to recognize that some discoveries choose us rather than the other way around. Sarah felt Emma lean against her side, 8 years old and already comfortable with concepts that challenged everything, humanity thought it knew about intelligence and consciousness. My daughter has been changed by this partnership, enhanced but also burdened with responsibilities no child should have to carry. The price of contact isn't just academic, it's personal, generational. Hayes nodded grimly. The soldiers I lost in Nevada, they died because we tried to force cooperation instead of earning it. Because we approached alien intelligence with weapons instead of wisdom. The autumn wind stirred through the pine trees, carrying whispers of ancient patience and cosmic perspective. Morrison looked around the circle of faces, Sarah's determined protectiveness, Emma's solemn acceptance, Webb's academic excitement tempered by caution, Hayes's hard-won understanding of the costs of arrogance. Finally, she gestured to her team to pack their ruined equipment. "I'll file my report recommending long-term observational study under modified protocols," she said. "But this won't be the end of government interest. Others will come." Sarah nodded, feeling the mountain's approval flow through her like warm stone. "Then we'll be ready for them, all of us." As the SUVs departed down the mountain road, Sarah realized that coming home meant more than returning to the cabin. It meant accepting that she was no longer the desperate single mother who had climbed this mountain months ago. She had become something new, guardian, translator, bridge between worlds. The real adventure was just beginning, the new beginning. 6 months later, Sarah stood in the doorway of the cabin that no longer looked like the desperate shelter she'd bought for $1. The structure had grown, not through human construction, but through something far more elegant. Crystalline formations had emerged from the foundation stones, creating new rooms that glowed with soft blue radiance during the long winter evenings. The mountain itself had welcomed them home. Emma sat at the kitchen table, now sturdy pine that had grown from living wood into furniture without ever being cut. She bent over homework that would have challenged graduate students. Mathematics that described crystalline consciousness, geology that mapped the connections between mountain ranges worldwide, biology that redefined the boundaries of life itself. Her teacher participated through video calls from the university, Dr. Webb having convinced the administration that remote learning was necessary for specialized research circumstances. "Mama," Emma said without looking up from calculations that mapped consciousness flows through tectonic networks, "the mountain families in Tibet are asking about the government people again. They want to know if they should hide deeper." Sarah felt the familiar flutter of responsibility that came with serving as translator between species. Through the crystalline network, she sensed ancient consciousnesses across continents, the patient guardians of the Himalayas, the deep dreamers beneath the Andes, the young enthusiasts growing within volcanic island chains, all of them watching humanity's response to first contact, all of them deciding whether to reveal themselves or retreat into geological silence. "Tell them Director Morrison kept her promise," Sarah replied, settling beside her daughter with her own work, correspondence with researchers worldwide, who were learning to approach Earth consciousness with respect rather than invasive instruments. "The observation protocols are working. No excavation teams, no military installations, just watching, learning." Emma nodded, her enhanced awareness already conveying reassurance across thousands of miles of stone and crystal networks. At 8 years old, she carried conversations with minds older than continents, translating between human urgency and geological patience with the natural ease of a child who had never known any other reality. The sound of approaching vehicles made both of them look up, not with the old fear of government intrusion, but with the anticipation of expected guests. Dr. Webb's truck appeared first, followed by Colonel Hayes's jeep. Their weekly visits had become routine, part of the careful balance they were all learning to maintain. Webb emerged carrying boxes of monitoring equipment that the mountain allowed on the property, instruments designed to observe rather than penetrate, to record rather than extract. His academic papers had revolutionized geology, introducing concepts of planetary consciousness that were slowly gaining acceptance in progressive scientific circles. The price of his discoveries had been his university position, but he'd found something more valuable, purpose beyond publication. Hayes stepped out of her vehicle with the easy confidence of someone who had found peace with her choices. Her military consulting now focused on teaching restraint rather than force, helping intelligence agencies understand when not to intervene. The nightmares about Nevada had finally faded, replaced by dreams of blue light and ancient wisdom. "Any word from the international monitoring stations?" Sarah asked, as they gathered around the kitchen table, where Emma continued her impossible homework with the casual focus of childhood. 14 new sites have been identified, Webb reported, spreading maps that showed crystalline energy signatures across 6 continents. The network is vast. We're talking about a planetary intelligence that's been present since the earliest geological periods. Hayes leaned back in her chair, still marveling at how normal these impossible conversations had become. The military applications alone could revolutionize everything: communications, energy, defense systems, but only if approached as partnership rather than exploitation. "That's the test, isn't it?" Sarah mused, feeling the mountain's attention focus on their discussion with the gentle interest of a parent watching children puzzle through complex problems, whether humanity can evolve past the need to own everything it encounters. Through the window, autumn was giving way to winter again. The annual cycle that had once terrified Sarah with its promise of cold and isolation. Now she watched snow begin to dust the pine trees with anticipation rather than dread. The cabin would remain warm through crystalline heating that drew energy from the planet's core. The well would never run dry, connected as it was to underground rivers that flowed through networks of living stone. Emma looked up from her homework, pencil poised above equations that described consciousness in mathematical terms. "The pretty lights say thank you," she announced with the matter-of-fact delivery that characterized all her translations. "They're happy we chose to stay." Sarah reached over to smooth her daughter's hair, marveling at how this child who had once lain dying in a hospital bed now served as humanity's primary ambassador to a form of intelligence older than civilization. The sacrifice had been everything she'd thought she wanted: security, normalcy, the comfortable illusion that love alone could protect the people she cherished. The reward had been everything she'd never known she needed. Outside, snow continued to fall on 40 acres of pine forest, where ancient consciousness whispered through crystalline formations, where impossible became routine, where a desperate single mother had discovered that sometimes the greatest adventures began not with departure, but with the courage to call someplace home.